Hey, Johnny Tudor, then you're looking good, man. You look like you've been on a cruise or something.
Well, the weather's been great. I've been sat on my balcony. It was like being on a ship.
Because it's ships we're going to talk about today. Now, I've never done a cruise, never performed on a cruise, but it became part of your life, didn't it? Hitting the high seas. Well, not just hitting the high seas, but hitting the high seas.
The first one I ever did was back in the late 60s. And I got a phone call from my agent. And I'd never been on a ship before. And it was a ship called the Carmania, which is an old Cunard ship. And it was going to Montreal, right?
Lovely.
But what I didn't realize, being a rookie at sailing, it was going on October, I think, across the North Atlantic, which gets pretty rough. So I didn't know. I get on there now, and I'm okay for 2 days, and then I'm as sick as a dog. Like Dickie Andrews would say, I was going to die. So anyway, I'm suffering this, right? I'm in my cabin like a sick pig, laying on my bunk, and then I'd get up, go up and do the show. While I was doing the show, the adrenaline kept me going. I felt okay. And I'd go straight back to the cabin. So after about a week of this, because it was like a 15 or an 8, no, how long was it to Montreal? About a 10-day crossing, I think. Anyway, I saw the doctor. He said, "You fool, come and see me." He gave me an injection. I was right as rain.
Yeah, ever since you were a good sailor, were you?
No, I just take the tablets now. I didn't realize. If you take one of these tablets the night before, they stay in your system. They make you feel a bit drowsy if you take them in the day. If you take it the night before, have a good sleep, it's still in your system. You can go through a force 10, your mind, you know. So anyway, we get to Montreal, right? I had a character on there called Noel Murphy, his name was. And he was a steward, and he's just sitting in the library selling stamps to the little old ladies. And that's all he did. And he'd see the lady. He'd say, "Stamp, madam, of course. It's a hard life at sea, isn't it?" Hard life. And then we get to Montreal. I've only got like $5 in my pocket because I thought I got paid on board. See, so this was the first one I'd ever done. And I didn't. I got paid at home through my agent, right? So I got no money now. We get to Montreal. I said, "You don't need money," says this Noel Murphy said. "I'll take you to, we go see the expo. It was Expo 67. So I said, "Well, what are we going to do for money?" He said, "Don't worry about that." He said, "We sort it out." So we hitch a lift and get to this expo place. So, and then he walks through the turnstiles and he pulled out his wallet and he went, "Irish delegation," and walked straight through. And the woman said, "Excuse me, sir." He's gone, right? I'm left like an idiot now outside. He comes out about 10 minutes later and he says, "Follow me and do what I do." I said, "Okay." So we went to the turnstile. He showed his hand and he had an infrared stamp on his hand. See? They shine it. "Okay, you're entering, you go." And he says to me, so I showed my hand. Of course, there's nothing on it. He said, "You're an idiot. I told you to get your hand stamped. Why didn't you do it when I told you?" "Okay, we're both in there for nothing." So we get to, there was a British pub on the site. It was very expensive. And he'd put a tie on before he left. What is he? I think it was Royal College of Surgeons tie or something, right? So this American guy says, "Oh, it's American, surgeon, blah, blah." So he buys us a drink. So we got a glass each now, and he pulls out a bottle of whiskey from his pocket he'd had from the ship, and we get stoned now. We haven't spent any money yet. So we leave the expo, and we get up onto the motorway, and we're thumbing the lift now. And the guy pulls up in a big Cadillac. He said, "Where to?" He said, "Take me to a nightclub." So we go to this nightclub in Montreal, and he blags his way in. He says, "We're agents. We've just come from a Palladium in London. We're looking for good acts, you know." So we get into this club for nothing, right? And we watch the most fantastic floor show. And with the $10 we had left, we got in a cab back to the ship. And he gave the cook 2 bob for something, and he gave us egg and chips. So we didn't spend any money. So I said, "This guy's either going to end up a millionaire or he's going to be in jail." Years later, I'm in South Africa in a casino, and this bloke stood next to me. He said, "Do I know you?" I said, "Noel Murphy." He had a company called Blarney Promotions. He had a bloody Rolls Royce. He said, "I knew it. I knew it." He said. So that was my first sojourn into cruise life. Oh, God.
And when you say the North Atlantic is busy, that time of the year.
Oh, it's rough. It's rough.
It's very big, isn't it? Those waves.
Oh, a force 9, force 10. I mean, it's like this. You're up 3 steps, and then when you're walking up the stairs, you're up 3 of them. Whoop.
Yeah.
But if you take the tablets, you see, you're okay. You survive.
Keep taking the tablets. And the people that come onto those cruises, as you say, the little old ladies back then. But it's changed, hasn't it, over the years? Now it's what sort of performance space did you have on that ship? Was it a stage and a proper stage and everything?
It was proper stage now, but it was a bit staid. It was a bit like old people, and like the next trip, I did the next trip on it, which was into the Greek islands, which was one of these cultural trips, looking at all the artifacts and all the different ruins and so forth. We had people on there. One guy called Sir Ian Moncrief of that ilk, and he had his girlfriend with him, who was a German hooker. I couldn't believe it.
Allegedly, John.
Allegedly, it was his secretary.
Absolutely.
And then, so that was the first one I did, yeah. And then I used to do the QE2 a lot. Now, the QE2 was a transatlantic liner, not like these cruise ships you have today. It actually did the trip 5 days there, 5 days back. Mm-hmm. And they'd have great big stars on board. I think there was, what's his name was on once? Neil Sedaka, and they had Charles Aznavour was on. So there were lots of big stars used to come on and do like 1 or 2 gigs on the way across. And I got on. I said, when am I working? They said Thursday. So only did one or 2 shows over and 1 or 2 shows back. And then now, because it became much cheaper, I don't want to sound disparaging, but anybody can go on them now. Before it was only rich people could afford these things,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the clientele now is more like, going to a club in Britain or a theatre in Britain, because lots of Brits.
Mm. I mean, how rich were the people that used to go then, like Sir Ian?
Oh, very rich. Yeah. Oh, very. I mean, if you were like some of the suites on the QE2 were like 35 grand. I mean, it was mad money, I mean, but I used to do this wonderful little ship called the Sea Goddess. Now, the Sea Goddess was it was a yacht. It held 100 passengers maximum.
Right.
And it was like wonderful because I was the only act on board. There was like a little trio which would accompany me, and that was it. So I do about 2 or 3 shows a week, and that'd be it, see. But there are lots of very rich people used to come on there because they knew they wouldn't get bothered. There was no tannoy saying, Mr. Jones, can you go to the... There was none of that. If they wanted them, they put a letter under the door. It was really swish. I mean, it was 5-star cuisine, and I lived like them. It was unbelievable. I had a cabin like them. I ate in the restaurant like them. I was like, like a passenger.
Didn't want to come home.
Yeah, that's right. I met Ernest Borgnine. I told you. Years ago, I told you about Ernest Borgnine, the film actor. I'm doing this show on the ship, and there's this craggy-faced guy at the front. And I thought, I know this man because he's done so many films. So I did my show, and I came off. He says, great job, John. Great job. I said, oh, thank you, Mr. Borgnine. He says, call me Ernie. And he was great. I used to go to dinner with him and stuff. Him and his wife, Tova, her name was. I had a nice letter to say, if ever you're in the States, come and see me. And there was another guy. You had very rich people. Actually, they would rent the ship for a week. They would charter it for themselves. A guy called Mr. OJ, a very smart businessman. And he booked it for a week for his wife's birthday, and he invited all his friends. So you had people like Mike or the mechanics. Mike Rutherford was on board. Who else was on board? Greer Garson, the old film actress, was on board. I mean, all people like that, Yeah. So it was a wonderful experience. We get into the Virgin Gorda, which is just by Necker Island, where Branson's got his little island. And opposite Virgin Gorda is another little island, which is uninhabited, okay? So he hires this island now to do a firework display for his wife to see for her birthday. He flies in Paul McKenna to do 1 gig. I mean, it was like unbelievable. Then we get into Monte Carlo, and Adnan Khashoggi got on board. The arms dealer.
Yeah.
Because he lived in Marbella up in the mountains, and he came on board with his wife, who was a big tall woman, and a guy called the Count. And this guy, the Count, had the silver top cane and the iron mark. It was like some part of like a Bond movie, because Khashoggi's a little short bloke, and his wife was a big, tall, very statuesque, lovely-looking woman. I mean, you couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Some of the people I met on it was unbelievable.
And the show that you did was the same type of show as you do if you were doing a
singing,
club in Britain?
dancing, a couple of gags, some impressions or whatever. Mm. There was once when the McLaren racing team chartered it for the Monte Carlo what do they call it? Grand Prix.
Oh, Grand Prix. Yeah.
So he said, I'm going to do any work this week, John, says the captain, because they just want to use it like a hotel. See. So I'm just sat on deck watching the race because it's a fortune if you want to go there, right, to do that. So anyway, they said, well, you're not doing anything. Sea Goddess 2, which was the sister ship, he says, is coming into Saint-Tropez. Can you go over there and do a gig for him? I said, yeah, okay. So they sent me in a taxi over to Saint-Tropez from Monte Carlo. I did the gig and I stayed the night on that ship, right? So I felt the next day I'm getting off now to go back to my ship, Sea Goddess 1. And what do I see? But the wind spirit coming in. Now, this is a ship that's got sails. It's wonderful, this thing. And I knew the manager on there, and he's on board. And he went, Johnny, what are you doing there? I said, I'm just going back to Monte Carlo. He said, we're going. Do you want a lift? So I get on this beautiful yacht. And he's playing all classical music, and the sails are up. And we sail into Monte Carlo Harbour. And the captain, who's a Norwegian, he's on the bridge. He says, Johnny, what are you doing on board that ship? I said, I'm just having a lift, captain. But some of the people on that, I remember, because we used to dock in Monte. Have you been to Monte Carlo?
No, but I want to go now, Johnny. I want to go, but I want to go in a sailing ship.
Yeah, well, all the ships, they kind of dock right in town. Right. And you just get off the back and you walk onto the deck. So there was this guy walking past, and he had two girls on his arm. He went, I say, can I come on board? I saw the bloke on the deck. He said, no, sorry, it's a private yacht, and you can't come on board. But I've got two of the best-looking gals in Monte Carlo with me. He said, I don't care. It's a private yacht. You're not coming on. Oh, my God.
Tell me about nearly getting shot in Galveston. And it sounds nothing like the song by Glenn Campbell, your story, does it?
Well, what happened was I was on a boat that was a Cunard boat called the Princess. And I was on with a guy called Peter Gordino. Do you remember Peter Gordino?
Yes, I do.
He's quite big in the 70s and 60s, 70s. He was like a dancer and a singer. And he did what was that space thing called? TV series. It wasn't Blake 7, it was one of those he was in. Anyway, if you saw his face, you know, there was him and there was an American comedian. We're all on board for the weekend. We come into Galveston and we get off the ship and we're going towards the exit to go out of the dock into town. So the comic and Peter Gordino just walk through and leave me behind. There's this big guy, must have been 6'7", muscles in his spit, you know what I mean? Big Stetson on. And he stood there and he went, we have to talk. I said, what? He says, we have to talk. I said, what about? I said, there's something wrong here. I said, look, I think you've got the wrong guy. I said, I'm from Wales. I've never been to Galveston in my life. So he looked at me a bit and he said, okay. And he let me go, see? I didn't think anything of it. So I got back to the ship. Turned out this guy, his wife had an affair with a pianist on the ship. And the pianist was roughly my size, dark hair, which I had in those days. And so it looked like I was the spit of this guy. So this guy got on the ship. He had a gun. How he got through security, I'll never know, right? He's going to shoot this fella. So years later, I'm doing a Pontins tour, and this pianist is one of the pianists in Pontins. I said, you nearly got me shot. He said, you think you got problems? He said, I had to stay on board for 3 months. Everywhere we docked, this guy was on the dock waiting for me. Oh, I don't mind getting shot for something I've done. Do you know what I mean?
No, shot the wrong guy. Shot the wrong guy in Galveston.
That's right, yeah.
But being on board ship, now, I think we mentioned this before when we chatted, but you do become a bit of everybody's personal property, don't you? Because there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. That's
right. I mean, after you've done before your first show, it's great. You're just like one of them. As soon as you've done your first show, as you say, they stop you. Hey, John, like the show, but boom. Everybody's got everybody's got something to say, and they all want to give you advice. Have you noticed? People all know about show business. So one guy said, "Hey, John, I love the show, you know, but I didn't like that last number. That sucked. What you want to sing is," and he gives me something he wants me to sing. So I said, "What do you do, sir?" He says, "I'm a gynecologist." So I said, "You know what they say? If you want to know about show business, ask a gynecologist." And I walked away. I don't think he liked it very much.
But I suppose there would have been agents coming on, big names coming on, offering you deals, offering you different bits and bobs. Hard to say no.
Well, I met two very big agents. One was called Sherwin Bash, okay? And he was a really nice guy, and he invited me to dinner one night. And he said, you know what you want to do? I said, what? He said, you should be doing that, Me and My Girl, he said. He said, well, can you get me? He said, I couldn't get you when you haven't got a green card. Anyhow, I said, who'd you handle? He said, Tony Orlando and Dawn, Neil Sedaka. He said, what was the other one? Oh, the Carpenters. I don't know, he's a big guy, this. Wow. But he was a real nice fella, you know.
Yeah.
And then another time, I can hear this woman coming on up the deck, and she's got like an American accent, but I recognized her, but I didn't recognize her as being American. Anyway, she comes up, and then I sussed it was Marion Ryan. Now, Marion Ryan used to be a singer back in the 50s and 60s, and her sons were the Ryan twins. You remember Eloise and all that?
Oh, yeah, great record.
Right. And she was with this guy. So I looked him on the manifest, and it was Harold Davidson. Now, Harold Davidson, back in the day, he was the big impresario who'd bring all the big stars in. You know, Sinatra would come in for him and, you know, people like that. And Dean Martin, anybody came into Britain, they'd come through Harold Davidson. Anyway, he'd gone and lived in America, and now he was Sinatra and Sammy Davis's agent. And he put together the tour with Sammy Davis, Sinatra, and Liza Minnelli, and they did a tour. But this was the time when Sammy Davis had problems, and he had an operation on his throat. So I'd be on the stage, and they loved my act, because I do like an American act, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And when I did my Sammy Davis impression, they were up on the seats shouting in the morning. So I said, can you get me on a gig with Sinatra? He said, you wouldn't have another singer near him. He said, if you're a comedian, I could have got you a gig, mate. He said, but not as a singer, forget it.
Wow.
But he apparently they said that Sammy Davis had this operation with throat cancer. He said he's still smoking. He won't give up his smoking. Because he died, didn't he? Not long after.
Yeah.
So I met some people on there.
What about the food, Johnny? Was it always good?
5 stars. In the end, you got a bit fed up, though, because it was all this like nouvelle cuisine, and it was beautiful food, don't get me wrong. But in the end, you wanted beans on toast, you know what I mean? So I used to go down the crew mess sometimes and sit with the captain on one of the offices and have food downstairs, you know, which is more rough and ready. You go and serve yourself. And I remember I was down there one day, and this captain, he was a right character. His name was Sven Erik Pedersen. He was real Norwegian guy, you know. And he was like Popeye, really tough. And the waves are going over the portal. I said, bit rough out there, Captain. He said, we are at sea, you know. He used to do his announcement, and he sounded like Hitler. He'd go, ladies and gentlemen, we have a crew muster by the gymnasium. This is for crew only. Have a nice day. But he was a nice bloke. But the food was terrific. I mean, Freddie, the chef, he was someone else, Fred. I think he was Austrian chef. And he still loved my Tom Jones impression. I used to do an impression of Jonesy, but it was like a comedy one. I used to do the lyrics to like a parody to Green Grass at Home, you know.
Yeah.
And he used to love this. He's, Johnny, you got to do the Tom Jones. I left my guts out and do Tom Jones. So, yeah.
And over the years, those were the stages, the actual theatres have become, well, they're as good as any stage anywhere in the country, aren't they?
Oh, the big ships, they've got the full works, the lighting rigs, and it's beautiful. It's all like amphitheatre style, you know. They hold about 800, 900 people or something. And they're like being in a big theatre.
Yeah. What do you do then? Do you turn up? Do you have to turn up with all the parts? Do you?
You got to have all the parts. Yeah.
Yes. You
I was lucky. I've always had the parts because I've always worked with bands, you know.
Yeah.
So, and then if I needed any done, I'd go and see my friend Con Jones. Remember Con Jones?
Yeah.
He used to be the MD up at Diamond. What a good arranger he was, though.
Yeah.
And he used to write beautifully. It was all clear. And you'd go on the ship, say, is this one of Con's arrangements? They'd know it straight away.
Wow. And of course, you've got to look after your music, Johnny, when you're on board ship, you know. Because the last thing you want to do is have your music lost at sea.
Oh, my God. That's what you need, isn't it? I never forget once. I just got on board something. I wanted to transpose one of them down.
Right.
My uncle was a music arranger, so he taught me how to do all this. See, so I'm on the deck. It's a lovely day, and I'm writing the parts, but I'm doing it down like a tone or whatever. And all of a sudden, the wind blew, and half of them went in the swimming pool. Oh my God. Yeah, they're great. And they got really good bands on board, really good readers, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what do you do all day then? Because as you say, you maybe a gig or two in a week, maybe,
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, 2 weeks, two, 3 max a week. Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, you get up in the morning, you go for your breakfast.
Right. Well, that's a good start.
If you get into it, because it usually comes into port most days, perhaps there'll be a day at sea. Mm-hmm. So when you get in port, you get off and you go into town. You do what you got to do, enjoy yourself, come back on board. If you're not working, you just go to dinner, and then go and watch somebody else working. If there's a show every night on the big ships.
Yeah.
For instance, there'd be like me and our friend Mike would perhaps be on board. Mike Doyle. Yeah, because he does loads of cruises. And then there'd be perhaps a girl singer be on board, and there'd be, so you take it in turns. You do, because they don't want to see the same show every night, do they?
No.
Plus, there's the show that they put on like a potted musical. There's dancers on board, you see, and singers. So they do like mini musicals, really good shows.
Right.
And then the likes of me and Mike Doyle and that would go on and do like our cabaret bit, like our one night when we did our thing, our shows. So the dancer would go on and open up, then we go on and do like an hour or 45 minutes or whatever it is. But when you're not working, you're just like a passenger. That's all you do.
Yeah.
Sunbathe. Go out on the ski things, the water skis.
Jet skis and everything, water skis. Yeah.
And you know, I was with this friend of mine. He was the cruise director, and he was from Cardiff.
Right.
And I didn't know him before that, but he was like, he's become a great friend. So he said, John, come in the speedboat with me. He said, I got to take some of these out water skiing. You just sit in the back and, spot them, make sure they don't fall off or something. I said, okay. So I'm sat in the boat with my sunglasses on, and he's belting the boat. He looks around at me and says, hard life at sea, innit, John? Oh, yeah.
But having said that, as you say, after you've done it a while, once you've had those meals every night and you're stuck on board a ship, it can be a hard way of life. I mean, it sounds like I'm making excuses, Johnny, but it can actually be quite a hard way of life, can't it? Hard way to, because they pay you good money. And it must be hard to leave. It must be hard to leave it, but for your liver's sake, I'm thinking,
Well, if you're a drinker, look out, because on the Sea Goddess it was for nothing. The booze was all in, and in every cabin would be a bottle of whiskey. There'd be Black Label, there'd be a Chivas Regal, or there'd be a Courvoisier brandy, there'd be gin. Every drink you want to be in your cabin. So once you take a couple of tots, the next morning there'd be a new bottle in there. So if you were a drinker, you could really go to town. But I'm not a drinker. I have a glass of wine. That's about it.
Yeah.
But the food and everything was laid on. It was wonderful, really.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're paying for. Some of them are paying $3 or $4 grand a week just to go on this thing,
Gosh. And then the conversations that you'd have with people, the interesting people you'd meet who weren't gynecologists, expert in entertainment. You must have met some incredible people.
Oh, yeah. Well, one guy I was talking to was from New York, and he said, he was talking about my act. I like your show, John, blah, blah, blah. I said, what do you do then? What was his name? Mr. Goodman. So what's your business, Mr. Goodman? He said, I got a store in New York. And that's all he said. His store was Bergdorf and Goodman, which is like Selfridges, you know what I mean? And he owned it. I mean, you meet big, really rich people, but they're really nice.
Yeah.
Because they've got no edge. They don't need it. They don't need any veneer because they've got it all. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then another guy, this guy called Mr. OJ, I told you about, that rented the ship for his wife's birthday. He invited people like Mike Rutherford, who was a really nice. You ever met Mike Rutherford?
No.
Mike and the Mechanics.
Yeah.
He was originally with
Genesis,
wasn't he? Yeah. And there was Gerhard Berger, the racing driver, was on board. And he's just rubbing shoulders with all these people. It's like unbelievable. And then when we got into Marbella, this is when Khashoggi got on board, because we used to use his little dock. He owned that little dock in Marbella, Khashoggi, because he had a boat called the Mabilla, and he sold it to Trump, funny enough. And so nobody was allowed to use this, but he let us go in there because the Sea Goddess was about the same size, the yacht. And he came on board for this dinner, and then he invited everybody, crew and all the officers, to his house. Now, he had a house in the mountains, and he had this huge place up in the mountains. And the kid answered the door. He was in fatigues. The kid, he was about 12, on a motorbike, and he opens the door. And they had this big, huge refectory table, and he had a stable with all these wonderful Arab horses in it. It's like another world. You can't believe this thing.
Yeah.
And then Sean Connery was buzzing us once in his motor, because he lived down there as well. And he's buzzing about. Just Sean Connery over there. Did you ever meet a boxer called Eddie Avoth? He's from Cardiff.
Oh, I remember the name. I never met him, but he was a champion boxer, wasn't he?
He was a champion boxer. He was a nice bloke. A big pal of mine. And he used to run a restaurant in Port Banús. It was called Silks. And anybody always went to Silks. I mean, there was like Jimmy Tarbuck could be in there, Sean Connery. They'd all be in there, you know. And we came into Monte Carlo. I kept mixed up. Monte Carlo, Port Banús one day. And I said, I got to go and see my friend, you know. So I walk in and he sees me. Now, he was 6 foot, like 3 or 4. And he sees me above all these people. He grabs hold of me, picks me up, and he kisses me. I said, what are you doing? Eddie was a hell of a bloke. Yeah.
What great stories. The thing is now then, I think we've maybe started on a little thing about cruise ships. Maybe we should shall we see if we can get Mike Doyle back on to talk about...
Well, get Mike on again. He's done loads. He does them every year. See, I used to do them all the time, and then I got fed up. I literally got fed up because I was away from home too much. But unfortunately, because, as you know, all the clubs closed, they asked Ken Dodd where show business has gone. He said he's gone to sea. And it's true. There's more work on ships than anywhere else now, because all the people go on holidays, go on a ship, go and see a show.
Yeah.
It's like the old days when they used to go to the summer seasons, you know.
Yeah. Well,
so Mike would be good to get on board, yeah.
Let's see if we can. I'll give him a call. See if we can fit him in maybe next week or the week after. All right. Well,
That's
look,
right.
don't get too burnt now. Make sure you get...
I won't. It's like my tan.
It's looking lovely, man. Looking 30 years younger.
I know.
Johnny Tudor.
I'll get a bit of Botox.
You don't need... Looking great there. So it's good night from me, and it's...
Good night from me.
See you next time.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Ta-da, Mal. Ta-da, boys.